Hi, this is Keith Cutter with EMFRemedy.com. I was honored to present at Safe Living Technologies webinar yesterday, which included Lloyd Burrell, Dr. Magda Havas, Bruce Hildesheim, Rob Metzinger, and Orem Miller. You can view the entire webinar at Safe Living's channel. I'll put a link in the description. I'm including my presentation here since there was a problem with audio in a portion of my presentation. Here we go. All right, today we're going to talk about millimeter wave environmental exposures other than 5G telephony. So we're going to be talking about a couple of sources of millimeter wave exposure in the environment already that don't have anything to do with smartphones or the smartphone infrastructure. So by way of introduction, I am a 38-year survivor of electromagnetic poisoning who's learned how to build non-native EMF resilience. Now I spend my time helping other survivors as well as clients wanting to take a precautionary approach to harmful man-made electromagnetic radiation. I offer assessment, remediation, and design services. I produce a weekly syndicated podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, and other platforms. The name of the podcast is Reversing Electromagnetic Poisoning. It is designed primarily for poisoning survivors, although everybody is welcome, and I have a more mainstream offering on YouTube under the handle at EMF Remedy. So I thought I and my clients were safe. Safe from millimeter wave RF exposure here in what I call the majestic inland Northwest. Thought we were safe due to the rugged terrain and low population density, making it unlikely they would implement millimeter wave 5G here. As a beta tester for Safe Living Technologies' new millimeter wave RF meter, I learned that we are safe for now from millimeter wave 5G, but not millimeter wave RF from other sources. In fact, there appears to be plenty, and here are my conclusions. Areas thought to be safe from 5G millimeter wave deployment have unexpected, I'll just say, challenges with millimeter wave RF exposure. And we're talking about involuntary exposure here. Areas already exposed to 5G millimeter wave deployment will have additional unexpected involuntary millimeter wave RF exposure. Today I'll be talking about two types of exposures that will unfortunately affect almost everyone. I mean, who doesn't visit grocery stores? Who doesn't spend time on or near vehicle byways? We'll also be talking about ways to minimize personal exposure. Let's talk first about supermarkets, and here's the problem. It's the door sensors that control the portals of entry, those sliding doors that open automatically as you enter and exit. Here in the inland Northwest, and I suspect across the U.S. and possibly beyond, all my regional and national stores bathe customers with extreme levels of millimeter wave RF exposure. So in order to get at the goodies inside the store, you have to enter the store. And if you go through these doors, at least in my area, you're going to be exposed. Now, in my area, we have 3 regional chains and 1 national chain. With the new Safe and Sound Pro millimeter wave RF meter, I entered and exited each store 3 times and then averaged the numbers to come up with these averages I'm sharing with you here. They range from just over 11,000 microwatts per square meter to just under 23,000. I can't help feeling I've discovered why I've felt for the last many years slightly disoriented when I enter a supermarket. So anyway, I thought it was maybe part of the lighting and other unnatural features. Now I'm wondering what part millimeter wave exposure plays. I will say this, after entering and exiting 3 times in a row, On the first door, I felt sick. And never mind, I visited all 4 stores in the same day. All right, so since I've been around for a while, I know you don't need millimeter wave RF in order to control a door opener. It's absurd. There are many other options, and it just seems so curious to me, given the many different options, why have all of the supermarket stores settled on using millimeter wave RF to open doors? It's crazy. You might think, given all the options, that maybe one would, or 1 or 2, but all 4, just strange. So I have seen in my life pressure mats. That was the first thing I recall. As you walked towards the door, you would step on a little mat, and it had completed a contact when you stepped on the mat, and then the doors would open. It worked fine. The next thing I remember seeing when I was younger is photoelectric eyes. So there would be a photo cell on one side and like a little flashlight assembly on the other. And as you walked towards the door, you would break the beam. The doors would sense that, and the doors would open. Doormen. All the pressure mats, photoelectric eyes, doormen, none of them emit RF of any type, much less millimeter wave exposure. I'm sure there are other technologies as well. So why are they all doing this with RF? And never mind that, why all millimeter wave RF? Is it worth the potential harm? Do we risk burying an epidemiological signal, if there was one, that millimeter wave is harmful by exposing everyone? Would you pay an extra penny for each item in order to pay a doorman/greeter? I would. All right. I came up with a silly contraption, but it worked. As I recall, it was made of a cardboard box and a piece of shelving and a hefty amount of gaffer's tape. My objective was just to show people, for the sake of a video, what I was seeing on the meter. So keeping the meter in focus and the ambient sounds and sights in focus as well was a bit of a challenge. So this is my best effort here. So here goes. What you're going to see is the entry into a supermarket, followed by a cut and then an immediate exit from the supermarket. So here goes the entry and the exit, and you can watch the lights on the top of this meter going from no lights to some lights on the left to all of the lights lit up across the top and the numbers increasing. You'll see that as we go through both portals on the entry, and then we'll turn around and you'll see as we get close to the doors, not all the way to the doors, you'll begin to see the millimeter wave radiation increasing, and then we'll go through at least the first set of doorways on the way out. So here goes. Okay, so here's what you can do to minimize personal exposure. Shop elsewhere would be the first opportunity. If you have a grocery store in your area that does not use millimeter wave RF exposure to open the doors for you, you might want to shop there. That would be idea number 1. You might be able to find, as I did, one of the 4 markets had a small man door that you could push open. It was not an automatically operable door. There was no radiation exposure of any type with that door. It led to the delicatessen, and from the delicatessen you could access the rest of the store. when I go to that store, that's how I like to enter and exit that store. You might look for a manually operated door near you. You might want to consider home delivery or curbside delivery because neither of those will expose you to millimeter wave. If you must enter a millimeter wave controlled portal, don't spend unnecessary time before, between, or after the doors. Especially, there's usually an set of inner doors and a set of outer doors. Some places have benches in between where people can sit and wait for shoppers or wait for their ride or whatever. If you want to minimize millimeter wave radiation exposure, I would not recommend sitting in those benches that are between the indoor and the outdoor. So move away from the doors as safely and quickly as possible. In other words, don't loiter. And then avoid spending time near the doors. Don't dally inside or outside. And avoid checkout stands that are nearest to the doors. It depends on the layout of the supermarket, but I found there were some markets that had check stands that were being exposed because they were so near the doors to the millimeter wave radiation. So that's all for grocery shopping. Another place I believe virtually everyone in the population will be exposed to are areas in and around the byways. The problem is new conveniences in automobiles are being powered by millimeter wave radar technology. Depending on the model, this may involve emissions from the front, the rear, and both sides of the vehicle. So the circles in this image illustrate the rear-facing millimeter wave emitters on this vehicle. Depending on the make and the model, the emitters might not be obvious. And they may be hidden entirely. So unfortunately, you can't really tell with modern vehicles whether they emit millimeter wave radiation or not. But if you see these little dimples as appear here in this slide, you can be certain that the vehicle is capable of emitting the millimeter wave radiation. All right, so what you're looking at here is the FCC test report for a 2020 Lincoln Nautilus. The highlighted areas show that this device is an intentional radiator in the frequency range between 22 and 24 gigahertz. This is a license-exempt ISM band, I believe. It's fairly easy to process to enter into a search engine the make and model of the vehicle in order to eventually get to the radar emitters and subsequent FCC data. Now, I don't know how far back this vehicular radar technology goes. My son's friend has a 2010 Ford Fusion with what Ford calls, quote, reverse sensing system. So at least, 13 years, they've been loading up vehicles with millimeter wave radiation. The process for finding data on that, since there is no FCC ID listed in the owner's manual on the 2010 Ford Fusion, well, I just entered into a search engine. I put in 2010 Ford Fusion, and then I put reverse sensing system in quotes and replacement parts or something like that. And it came up with modules that you could buy for replacement, and they're very inexpensive, and you can get further information on what's going on in that particular vehicle. So my question is, are systems like these contributing to the symptoms I and my sensitive clients are feeling? By the way, I should mention that millimeter wave radiation easily passes through glass and enters adjacent vehicles. So the offering, the cheese and the mousetrap, as it were, with regard to the millimeter wave extras on some vehicles, they're offering adaptive cruise control, collision avoidance, automatic emergency braking, reverse sensing systems. And it seems like this is all part of something called the Intelligent Transportation System. So my question here is, the convenience of adaptive cruise control worth exposing everyone in the population? Because you may buy a vehicle that has this, but you're likely exposing yourself. Otherwise, the radar would not function, right? The way radar functions is the emitter goes off and it bounces off of something and comes back. And so if it's not coming back towards you and the vehicle that's emitting it, then the radar is not working, right? So even if you're willing to put up with that for whatever reason, know that you are polluting the environment immediately around you. Is it worth that? And seems like we've gotten by for a long time without it. Is it worth the potential harm? How can people who don't want to expose their children, for example, opt out? And would people have any idea what's causing them to be sick if, in fact, the millimeter wave radiation is doing so? How will people learn? I guess having a meter would be a meter capable of reading that frequency range, like the new Safe and Sound Pro millimeter wave radio would be a way. And my same comment as I had with the grocery stores, do we risk burying the epidemiological signal that there indeed is something harmful about millimeter wave exposure if we expose the entire population? As I asked earlier, who doesn't shop in supermarkets and who doesn't frequent areas on or near byways? Okay, so again, my ridiculous semi-portable camera meter setup, and I do this for the purpose of wanting to take you along for a ride with my video equipment so that you can kind of see and hear what I'm hearing. This isn't the way I would do an assessment if I wanted to actually find out how much radiation was being emitted. But I'm doing this for the purpose of being able to take you along for a ride. So let's take a look and a listen. What you're going to hear is a clip that I've put together of several vehicles that are passing by the area where I am in my car. Anyway, what you're going to see is a number of vehicles passing by. I think it's interesting, the modulation scheme that you hear in the different millimeter wave radiation emissions. They have a quite different sound to them. So take a look and a listen here. All right, so findings with vehicular radar. I commonly found exposures in the extreme range, which means greater than 1,000 microwatts per square meter. And I observed emissions from the front, the rear, the sides of vehicles. You may have noticed in the little video that we just played, you would hear the emissions as the car came towards me and then briefly paused, and then we heard more emissions from the back of the vehicle. Not every vehicle is operating the front side, both sides and the rear at the same time. Not every vehicle that has radar is so equipped. It may be just backing only, but emissions are possible from the front, rear, and sides. Millimeter wave RF easily penetrates glass, so I first learned about this vehicular radar by driving around. I was actually going to look for some 5G telephony signals, which I did not find. But I kept getting these other readings and eventually tracked it down and found it was the radar emissions. So easily passes through glass. I had the meter when I was just driving around, sitting on the dashboard, and the emissions were easily coming into my cockpit. Not difficult to acquire readings from 20 to 50 feet distance in my experience. So what are the implications? Well, obviously, the byways, our roadways and highways are now being contaminated have been contaminated for some time with millimeter wave radiation. And if untreated window glass provides no protection whatsoever. So there are other concerns as well, other than being in your vehicle and driving around. We're going to take a look at them one at a time. So first of all, with regard to sidewalk dining, I love sidewalk dining. My wife's and my favorite restaurant has sidewalk dining. And I should mention the restaurant makes me sick every time we go. And we go there often. Not because we're fools, but we like the people who own it. We like the food. The cuisine is awesome. What makes me sick is they love their Wi-Fi and their other clients love their smartphones, and their music system in the restaurant is Bluetooth based. So there's a lot of RF going, and we still go there regularly. I go there once a week if I can. I know why my wife and I had given up sidewalk dining, and it was before we got the millimeter wave meter from Safe Living. We had just given up on dining outside and kind of retreated back into the restaurant. As I go by now, I see that there's copious amounts of occasional millimeter wave radiation for people who are dining on the sidewalk. Pity to give up sidewalk dining. But if you're somebody who cares about managing your or your family's exposure to RF radiation, and particularly millimeter wave RF radiation, you might want to consider doing that. Now, with regard to living arrangements, if you live in a rural area, your concerns are going to be much different. But if you're living in a city and your apartment is right on the road, as is pictured here, you need to know that residences adjacent to the roadway will be affected with millimeter wave RF if you have untreated windows. And finally, of course, car travel is now problematic. For those wanting to avoid millimeter wave RF, and of course, it's also an issue for pedestrians, anybody walking in or near the roadways. So what are the survival tactics for vehicular radar? Not as many options here, but there are some things that you might want to think about. So first of all, carefully consider whether you want to support a vehicle company that would put such technology inside. Whether you would want a vehicle with millimeter wave RF-based radar. Avoid traveling in vehicles with the radar. Avoid sidewalk dining. Avoid living arrangements near roadways. And as an extreme measure, you might want to speak with who it is locally that you trust as an EMF resource. There are a lot of complexities, but vehicular shielding might be appropriate for you as an individual. So I hope this has been helpful. I thank Rob at Safe Living Technology for giving me the opportunity to participate in this event, and I turn it back over to you now.